From all the TED Talks I've looked at so far in this analysis series, I've always either watched them before or they've been on my radar as a speech that's referred to a lot. I've maybe seen clips and snippets from it. This one we're looking at today bucks that trend. I had never heard of it before I came to watch it today. And it's not necessarily a TED Talk, I don't think. Although it was delivered at a TED event, I would very much more put this in the frame of being a stand-up comedy set. And I think when we're analysing the speech today, that is the hat that I'm wearing in terms of you can't analyse this necessarily as a speech, but there are still elements of, well, what can we learn in the delivery and presentation of stand-up that we can learn from as speakers? And if you are going to be bringing something that's humorous into the TED stage or indeed into any traditional public speaking sphere, how do you just add those tweaks of speech elements to make it appropriate for that setting? The very first talk that I looked at in this series was Ken Robinson, for example. One of the funniest TED Talks that's ever been delivered, also just happens to be the most viewed of all time as well. So how can you deliver something that's still very funny, but have that underlying speech elements coming through? So I'm going to be looking at a little bit of both in this. Something a little bit different because it very much is new to me as well in terms of when I watched this for the first time and analysed it and put my thoughts together for this. Something new in terms of the channel and this analysis series as well. Just something that's maybe a little bit kind of lighter and a bit less speechy than the other TED Talk topics that we've looked at today. The footage that I'm going to be using, of course, is provided by TED. I do not claim ownership of this footage. The use of this footage is for informational and educational purposes only. With that in mind, let's now look at Maz Jobrani's speech. Make sure I get this right. A Saudi, an Indian, and an Iranian walk into a Qatari bar.
Hello Doha, hello! Salam alaikum! I love coming to Doha.
What we see Maz begin with is a regional greeting. Salam alaikum. Upon you be peace. Peace be upon you. And if you're stuck for a little bit of a way to introduce and a way to start to build that connection with the audience, a regional greeting can be a really effective response. Look at the screenshot of this audience right now. Can you see how many smiles are in that audience? Maz hasn't done anything. He said, hello, salam alaikum. That's all that he said. And you can see what a connection that's beginning to form already. So if you're presenting somewhere where there is a regional greeting, that is a good way to start and build that connection with the audience. So we're seeing Maz hasn't really done anything inventive. He hasn't reinvented the wheel, but he's picked an opening that he knows is going to connect with this particular audience, building that connection, getting them on side and helping set him up for the rest of his talk.
Swedish guy showed me my room. I said, where are the Qataris? And they said, no, it's too hot. They come out later. They're smart. They know.
So here we see some more rapport building with the audience. The Qataris, they're smart. They come out later. So it's complimenting the audience. It's flattering the audience. So as always, I recommend going and watching the full talk before you go and watch this analysis. The link is always in the comments. And what you'll see is that the little bit of the bit that's been leading up to this is Maz is talking about all of the international people that he's met in his time in Doha that aren't Qatari. And that has been a bit of an in-joke of the audience. They've laughed at that because they know that it's a little bit of a melting pot in terms of all the different nationalities you meet. And then he goes to the Qataris themselves and pays them a compliment, a little bit of flattery, and they enjoy that, they like that. So this is a good way to build rapport with your audience. You make a cultural observation, or you make some kind of observational humor that they all know and see themselves and understand and they laugh at. And then also there's a little bit of the compliment and flattery coming in there as well. If you big up your audience, if you tell them how good they are, they're going to like you. It's not rocket science, it is human psychology 101, but sometimes we forget to employ psychology 101 in our speeches. Employ it in your speeches and you get the audience on side.
Are there any Lebanese here tonight? Any Lebanese by applause? Lebanese? Yeah, the Middle East is...
So here we see a little bit of interaction with the audience. And the key when you want interaction with the audience is to tell them how you want them to interact. So you give them instructions. So if you're online and you ask people a question, you say, look, can you write your answer in the chat box? Can you raise your hand? Can you unmute and shout out? If you're in a physical audience, you say, look, can I see by a show of hands, or give me a yes, or by applause, show me if you're Lebanese. So remember, when you're interacting with the audience, you have to give them that instruction. Because if Maz asks at this moment, any Lebanese in the audience? Maybe some are going, raise hand. Maybe some are going, yeah. Maybe some are going, woo. So they're all interacting, but because they don't know what type of interaction to do, you get this scatter approach. When you want interaction, ask the audience for interaction, give them the instructions on how to interact, and then allow them to interact.
When Lebanon is the most peaceful place in the region.
So we've got some edgy humor there. Now, I personally am a big fan of edgy humor, and I think whenever you're doing a speech, in order to be remembered, you've got to be bold and take risks. People who play it safe with a speech and take no risks, they're not the speeches that are remembered. I Have a Dream was a bold speech that took a risk. It didn't play it safe. We Choose to Go to the Moon was not a speech that played it safe. Yes, We Can was not a speech that played it safe. You have got to be willing to take calculated risks in your speech. Now, trying things that you know are going to be deliberately divisive or on the bone, that's not exactly what we're talking about here. But you can see that although the humor is edgy, it's something that the audience are observing. There is a truth in that edginess. And you can see that they laugh and they recognize it. Yeah, this is a bit of a topsy-turvy situation because they're from the Middle East, or they have lived in the Middle East for a significant period of time in this audience, and they understand the dynamics and they understand the humor in that observation. So you want to be bold, you want to take risks, you want to be edgy, not in a way that's deliberately confrontational and divisive, but knowing where the line is and pushing it to that line. Pushing it to that line where people are still going to find it funny, or they're still going to find it informative or inspiring, but just before they start to feel overly challenged, resistive, defensive, and they start to switch off from you. Take risks from your speech. All of the best speakers who've done the most memorable speeches took a risk. You should too.
Next time you see a Saudi, look closer. They're just a little bit tilted.
What you see here is Maz is using his body language to really sell the punchline. So he's talking about different ways of greeting in the Middle East, talking about kissing, and talking about how the Saudis just go like a machine gun on one cheek. So what he does is he holds the posture and the expression. You meet a Saudi, yeah, I was just saying hello to someone, and he holds that. You can see, look, he's still holding it. The audience are laughing. He's got the laugh, but he doesn't stop the motion when he's got the laugh. He holds it to really savor and stretch out that laugh. When you're using body language to, in this case, tell a punchline, but also to deliver a punchline that isn't necessarily a humorous punchline, but it's a key emotional moment in a story, it's a key idea that you want your audience to take on, you want to hold that moment. Everything that you're doing with your body, your posture, your gesture, your expressions, you want all of that to be holding that central idea. In this case, it's holding that idea of humor, and it's allowing the audience to really savor and engage with that moment of humor. The same is true when you're delivering a point that's important but not humorous, is when you're using your body language, sell the body language and then hold that body language, hold it in that important moment, and the audience will be able to savor and engage with it even more.
We like to laugh, we like to celebrate life. And I wish more Americans would travel here. I always encourage my friends to travel, see the Middle East. There's so much to see, so many good people. And it's vice versa. And it helps stop problems of misunderstanding and stereotypes of happening. For example, I don't know if you heard about this.
So here we see a little bit of the serious message come out through the humor. And this is probably the only sort of speechy aspect of this TED Talk. The rest of it is basically just stand up essentially. But here we see a little bit of that. Well, what's the message I want the audience to take home? Why am I engaging with them? Why am I building this rapport? Why am I getting to them to laugh? Because when we laugh, we listen. What do you want them to listen to? And we just see a little bit of an injection of that here in this part of the, I keep on calling it a TED speech. We're getting more to like a TED presentation here, because I wouldn't call this a traditional speech, a lot more of a stand-up. But even in something that's stand-up, you've got, well, here's a message, here's a lesson to take away from all of the bits and stories and anecdotes and silly faces that I'm pulling for you. So that's what you always want to think, that when you've got something humorous in your speech, think about, okay, when that humor lands, and you hope it lands, don't you? So when it lands, you've built that connection, you've got the audience listening. What do you want them to connect and listen to? Because you have prime, fertile soil at that moment to plant the idea. And Maz at this moment plants his idea. What idea will you plant?
I know there's certain things I'm not supposed to say on an airplane in the US, right? Not supposed to be like walking down the aisle and be like, "Hi, Jack." You know, that's not cool.
You see here that Maz acts out that bit. Instead of saying, here are some things I'm not supposed to say on a plane, like "Hi, Jack," he actually goes into acting that out of walking down the plane, "Hi, Jack." And you can see, so the audience are being brought into that story. And so when you have the contrast between walking down the plane casually and then doing the cheeky wave and smile, and then the words are coming out now, you've got this bit of contrast going on, don't you? You've got the everydayness of walking down the aisle, you've got the cheekiness of the greeting, and then you've got the implied humor through the words that he's saying. So you've got this whole mix of emotions and context in there. And that's what really sells the humor. It sells the humor a lot more than just, here are some things I shouldn't say on a plane, right? When you're telling a story, what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring the audience into that story, make them feel like they are part of the story, make them feel like at that moment they are sitting in the plane watching Maz walking down and doing his greeting that might be misconstrued. That makes the story more immersive. The audience connect with it more, and that's why they're laughing, because they feel like they are in that story a lot more. And that's just a simple little bit of movement, a little bit of facial expressions and gesture. It's just a little bit of extra body language added in to the punchline is the words. The body language isn't really the funny part of the joke, but what it does is it gives that foundation and that boost to the funniness of the punchline. Saying the punchline by itself would get a chuckle at best, but incorporating all of those elements of body language and storytelling, that's getting a much bigger laugh.
If you're walking down the aisle speaking Arabic, you know, they might freak them out. You know, if you're walking, they might say, "What's he talking about?" So the key to my Arab brothers and sisters, you got to throw in random good words to put people at ease as you're walking down the aisle. Just as you're walking down, strawberry.
So here we are seeing language being used to create the humor. So Maz is using two languages to tell essentially a punchline in English. The majority of the speech has been in English. He brings in the Arabic there. Now, me watching this as someone who doesn't speak Arabic, I don't actually understand the two languages, right? It's not like I have that bilingualness that I'm sure a lot of this audience do have. So it's not being bilingual that makes the humor. It's just having that contrast between the sound of one language and the sound of another language. And again, we see a little bit of those delivery elements. We see the wave and the facial expression. That's a little bit of kind of the signature style of Maz's comedy. Again, as I said in the intro preamble, this is the first time that I'm seeing this speech and indeed Maz speak, but I can see already just through this that is kind of one of the techniques that he uses to really sell his humor. He's got this good kind of comedic facial expression, this little sort of like gesture, tilt, posture thing that he does, and he incorporates that with this use of two languages. Now, I work with a lot of clients who English is not their native language. They have two or more languages, and I always encourage them, find ways where you can get one of your other languages into your speech, because it's a point of difference. It's something that makes you stand out. It's something that adds to your culture and your identity and your personality that comes through. And that's what we're seeing here. Maz is using a second language to really sell this joke. It's something that makes him stand out. It's something that makes him look a little bit different. And it particularly works for this audience, many of whom will have that same bilingual mix between speaking or at least understanding a little bit of Arabic and speaking or at least understanding a little bit of English. So really clever union of two languages. And you don't actually need to perfectly understand both of the languages in order for the audience to get what you're trying to say. Maz Jobrani's TED Talk demonstrates that there are many ways to deliver a successful TED Talk. There are different personalities and styles that can come through. There are different approaches, different use of your content. But what you'll find is that there are certain key delivery foundations that sit underneath all TED Talks. And it's these foundations that I share with you in my free TEDx Masterclass. As an extra part of your ongoing education, watching this video, you can access a masterclass that I delivered for one of the TEDx events that I coached here in Scotland, the TEDx University of Edinburgh. And you can watch this masterclass. It's an hour-long masterclass that I delivered to the speakers who are going to speak at the upcoming TED event to teach them what are these key foundations that make all of these successful TED Talks shine out, and what foundations can you build on for your upcoming TED Talk, your aspirational TED Talk you want to do in the future, or frankly, just the other talks that you have to do in your life as well. I've put the link to the course in the video description below. Just click the link, you enroll for free, and you're going to get that hour-long masterclass as an additional resource on top of your TED training that you're doing watching these videos. Now what I want to do is I want to look at Maz's speech and pick out a few areas where I think he could improve his TED Talk. Now, as I said in the beginning, I'm not looking at this necessarily in terms of a traditional talk because it's really just a stand-up comedian set, as I said. But with that in mind, because it is being delivered at TED, I'm still going to think of some of the rules of speeches coming through and still thinking about in terms of improving the elements of his stand-up. I think there are speech techniques that can come in as well. So I've actually just highlighted two things that I want to pick up on in Maz's speech. Let's take a look at them.
My Indian cab driver showed up at the W, and I asked him to take me to the Sheraton, and he said, "No problem, sir." And then we sat there for 2 minutes. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "One problem, sir." I said, "What?" He goes, "Where is it?" I go, "You're the driver, you should know." He goes, "No, I just arrived, sir." I go, "You just arrived at the W?" "No, I just arrived in Doha, sir. I was on my way home from..."
With this bit, I think if Maz brings some awkward silence into this, I think it would sell the humor more. He gets into the car and he says, "Can I go to the Sheraton?" "Yes, sir." And instead of saying, "We sat there for a few minutes in silence," just, "Yes, sir." Is everything okay? Do you see how in that silence you start to sell the humor? People don't know what's going on. They kind of feel that sort of tense awkwardness. And a lot of humor actually comes from the release of tension. You know, you get that kind of near miss where you nearly trip and fall over, or a car just whizzes by you, and you kind of get that sort of weird, ha 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 ha, I'm glad nothing bad happened there. So a big part of humor comes when we release tension. And when we're telling a humorous story, we can manipulate that tension to help create those humorous moments. And I think there was an opportunity to do that here, or instead of telling us there was an awkward silence, show us that there is an awkward silence. Show, not tell is one of the fundamental storytelling principles, and I think here it could have been used to get even more laughs for this bit.
But he's gonna hijack the plane with some ice cream. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Thank you, Ted.
This is the second thing I wanted to look at. Right at the end, I felt the ending was a little bit flat. There wasn't really a killer punchline. We're finishing on the end of that two-language joke that I talked about earlier on in the video. But by the time we get here, the humor of that joke has dissipated. The peak of the humor came a little bit before, when he did the first one, raspberry, and that was the part that we looked at, and we heard that big laugh. And now he's continuing the bit, but it's not getting so much humor. So we're not finishing on this like killer punchline where the audience are roaring in laughter. Also, with my TED speech hat on here, I feel this is the opportunity where you are speaking at TED. Let's hear the idea worth sharing. That is the tagline, ideas worth sharing. And as I look at this speech, I go, what was the idea worth sharing? What was in this speech that wasn't just observational regional humor? And I think we heard it a couple minutes before. That part about traveling, about being exposed to other cultures, that for me is contained within all this humor. That to me seems like at least a take-home message that can come from this. I think that probably should be the take-home message that comes from this. I want to hear that at the end. I want to hear that idea worth sharing. That's what you're leaving the audience with. For 7 minutes, you've built that rapport, built that connection, you've got them laughing, fantastic. After they laugh, they listen. What do you want them to listen to? Why have you done all this hard work in building that rapport in a very short period of time? What do you want to plant in that fertile soil? What is the idea that you want to leave the audience with? And here I think there just wasn't any idea that got left at all. So if we're looking a little bit of structuring of this speech, either bring in that idea of traveling and experiencing other cultures to the end, or honestly, just re-say it. When you've got a take-home message of your speech, don't think you can just say it once and people automatically go, oh, that's what I'm supposed to take home. Say it again. So I would wanted to hear that at the end. Let's have that take-home message. Let's have that idea worth sharing. And that's what makes a great TED Talk. And honestly, that might be the reason why this speech has not come across my radar. It is something that's highly viewed. I've picked it because it's one of the most viewed TED Talks, certainly. It is entertaining. It is building connection. But the idea worth sharing, that what are you supposed to take after watching 7 minutes of this speech, it isn't really there. And that's what I want to see there. And I think that's what would turn this from a good presentation into a great presentation. And that's what we've always got to remember as speakers. We've always got to think about when we put all of this work into the body of our speech, we're coming up with all this content. Here are the ideas I'm going to be sharing. Here are the stories I'm going to be telling. Here's the pictures I'm going to use on my slides. It's so easy when we get caught up in all of those mechanics of the speech to lose that one key ingredient. What's the message of your speech? What are the audience going to take away? Don't forget the message of your speech, because otherwise all the hard work that you put into all the other aspects of preparing your speech, crafting your speech, and ultimately delivering your speech, if you miss out that last key ingredient, it's not going to have that same impact, and all the work you've put in isn't going to have that same reward.